I'm Aaron Desange, one of the senior partners at Page Exec, and I have the pleasure of speaking with Sarah Pierman today, who will talk about her journey and her thoughts on NED positions and requirements. Sarah is the CEO of Dynamic Boards, which she set up, and has held NED role since her late 20s. So I think, Sarah, thank you firstly for joining us. Please do tell us more about Dynamic Boards and what the aims of the organisation are.
Thank you, Aaron. Thanks for having me. And hi, all of you. Great to meet you. So kind of the bit of a backstory to it is I went to lots of events, as some of you will have done, and started talking to people about non-exec directors. And it was partly because I became one, a bit younger than expected. I joined the board of a bank at 29. And every time I said non-exec director, someone would say, I joined that site, or I thought about joining that site, but they were charging me like £2,000, £500, lots of money. And it made me realise that there was this bizarre paywall industry charging people to become non-execs. So I thought, right, what can I do here to disrupt this market and help? Everyone's talking about diversity on boards. How can I help the best possible mix of people actually find out about board roles? So that was the impetus behind the whole thing. And I set up Dynamic Boards to make it free and easy to be able to view all the board roles out there in the market, particularly focused on the paid board role market, but we do show some unpaid roles as well. So now we showcase about 100 roles a month. We list, so generally when you look on the site, there's around that number, and that it's totally free to join. You just fill in a form and then you can see all the roles. And for us, the big aim is to help UK boards become more diverse, have a much better mix. And that's not just ticking a few boxes. That's having people, with really interesting skills, experiences, backgrounds. Everyone is welcome. And I guess the vibe of the non-exec market has often been this sort of stuffy, unwelcoming, exclusive kind of vibe. And we want it to be friendly, welcoming, encouraging of difference. So that's sort of what's behind it.
Amazing. So that's absolutely in line with what we're trying to do with ENABL. Hence, so glad to have you on board. So rewinding it back 1 second, what is a non-executive director or NED? Yeah,
so there's a lot of jargon, and NED as a phrase, I think it means like a delinquent if you talk to someone in Scotland. But for us, I don't know any other job title that is defined by what you don't do. Non-executive, it's a bit of an odd way to give someone a label. You'd never say you're not the finance director, you're the HR one. You always say what they are. So you're not the executive director. That's the key thing to remember. So the executive directors, the CEOs, FDs, those kind of roles, people that are full-time in the business generally, although some people in those roles part-time now, but you are not one of those. You are there to be independent. So the whole point of your role is that you're not in the business day to day. Although I do know lots of non-execs straying a little bit too far. So a key thing is you are not there day to day. You are not one of the executive. However, you are a director. So legally, all companies must have directors. They're collectively responsible and personally liable for governance, for the big decisions, for the big strategy of the organisation. And so the bizarre thing is that you hold the director role just as much as a chief exec or someone else holds the director role, but you're not there day to day. So it's a tricky one in that you are there generally for board meetings, and you should be involved at other moments as well. But you are there to vote on the key decisions that the organisation will make, but you're not there for the day-to-day running. It's a duty-bound role, so you've got a statutory duty to exercise reasonable care, skill and diligence to promote the company. You can't be there just to bring them down. And generally, most organisations will have a code of governance that they're following. So once you know which code of governance it is, it depends whether they're regulated, what sort of organisation it is, obviously to follow that. One of the key things that I always think of as a visual is that you're meant to be nose in, but hands out. So you should be asking the questions, curious, quizzing, but not there for the doing.
Amazing. Unfortunately, no matter what I do, I'm always nose in, but there we go. I think that's a lovely way to. So how did you secure your first NED role? Because you're looking at that skill set, those things, what was it that A, attracted you, and B, you felt made you right for that role as well?
Yeah, so I had worked in banking, had a sort of fast career progression in my 20s, and got to director level in RBS's SME team when I was 25. So I was getting really good exposure. And I think one of the key things for me is I had senior level exposure. So I was talking to the partners of private equity houses, chief execs of businesses, SMEs, and it meant that I was used to operating at that kind of level. Which gave me confidence. And I do think a really key aspect of becoming a non-exec is that you have the confidence to be able to speak out and challenge and share your ideas at that level. So there's lots of different ways you can build that confidence. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to be on the board of a huge company as an exec before, but it does mean you have to have the confidence to operate in that environment. So I got the confidence. I got lots of experience that I felt was helpful for a particular board role. And what happened for me is actually when I was probably about 23, a headhunter had approached me about a role and I'd said no. I'm not interested in that role, but I'll have a coffee with you. It was a really interesting role, just don't want to do it now. And had a coffee with him and kept in touch. And it was like 5 years later, something, that this role came up. And the headhunter knew what I was doing, knew that I had left my full-time finance career, was doing a startup. So I was entrepreneurial, but also banking. And this was the board of a small specialist bank. And they needed a new non-exec. The rest of the board, brilliant guys, but were average age of 68. So they knew that it would be helpful to bring someone slightly younger on board and someone a bit more entrepreneurial, but still getting banking and regulation, because it's a huge, obviously, regulatory burden being a bank. And so they, contacted me about the role, and I jumped at it, thought it was a brilliant opportunity, and really enjoyed my time serving on that board. But I'd say a really key one is just getting that exposure at a senior level. Earlier in your career, the better, I'd say.
Yeah, absolutely. And so whether or not it's looking at, shadowing boards or whatever you can do to get that senior level SLT exposure early is key. But so you mentioned the confidence, the exposure. What are the skills or tangible skills do you think that helped you be successful in that role? So
tangible skills, it's really tricky to articulate. So I think a huge amount of it is listening and questioning. I had a finance background, but I haven't been in banking, so I was able to understand and interrogate the information that was coming to me, and I think that's really key. I think if you don't have finance experience, that's the one thing it can be helpful. You do need to be able to read a P&L, balance sheet, cash flow to sign one off, which the board have to do. So that's the only area where I'd say if you don't have those skills, it could be useful in upskilling. But aside from that, I ended up getting involved in all sorts of aspects of that organisation. So whether it be marketing, communications, HR, obviously finance, a lot of looking at culture, the values, that kind of thing. There was a huge amount of different areas that I got involved with. So as a non-exec, even if you come to the board with a skill, and I guess with me, they saw finance and they saw entrepreneurial, and in the end, they definitely saw like marketing, communication side of things as well. Even if you come with a skill, you are there to get involved in everything.
Right.
And they want your views on all aspects. So it's a tricky balance of don't become too skill obsessed when you look at non-exec roles, and don't be too held back by what they've written in the advert, I'd always say, because quite often they will end up appointing someone who doesn't actually totally meet the advert. So why couldn't that be you? Would always be my approach.
Love it. So don't look at what might put you off. Look at what might help you lean in.
And if you've got an opportunity to write a cover letter in some instances, then you can articulate in that cover letter, or you can articulate in an interview why your skills are going to be so useful to them, even though that isn't the exact match for their brief.
And so from your perspective then, why should one become a NED? Or maybe the opposite as well. Why should somebody not do it?
So I guess why you should become it, if you are someone that really enjoys being involved at the strategic decision-making level in whatever you are doing, then NED work may well interest you. I'd say you've got to be someone who doesn't shy away from responsibility.
Yeah.
You are someone whose neck is on the line with the decisions this organisation is making. You should be someone who, before and after board meetings, ponders whether that was the right thing. What decisions should be made, what's going on, what are they not saying. If that is something that interests you, and then it might well be for you. I'd say the opposite is if you are someone that just wants to do a portfolio career, make a little bit of money on the side by being a non-exec, and you're hoping that it won't be too big a time requirement, and you can just be one of the nodding donkeys around the board, then I would definitely say this should not be for you, because we've had enough of them in the past. We don't need any more. And I'd say the liability is a serious one. So the big reason not to do it is because you wouldn't want that liability. But what I would say is, if through the process you do enough diligence on the organisation, then you can reduce those risks. If you take the role seriously when you're there, you can reduce the risks. I was offered a role on a peer-to-peer lender, and I had 6 interviews. It's a really, really long process. And I was fascinated by the market, really interested in joining the board, bloody well-paid role, and was exploring it, really positive, but didn't feel like they were communicating their products clearly enough to their customers, and just could not get comfortable with that risk. Pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed, and ultimately could not join the board on that basis, because they weren't communicating that there was an unsecured product that retail investors were putting their money into, that giving the impression that it was secured by using the word property a lot.
Right.
But it was bizarre mini bond structures, and in the end that company went through a CVA. I think people got pennies back from their pounds. People lost a lot of money as a result of that organisation. There was some really heavyweight board members on that board, really, really senior guys from City. And I feel really grateful that I didn't get involved with that organisation. So I think sometimes organisations are desperate to, who knows what they were doing in that instance, but desperate to bring in some outsiders onto their board to show the PRA, FCA that they're legit, and they want you from that perspective. But you need to do your homework, and you need to make sure that you are happy with the risk you're taking, that you understand the organisation, that you get their strategy and where they're planning to go, and that you're comfortable with those risks. And so probably always worth talking to a couple of other people in your network about the role and any questions you've got to get their views on it as well. Doing your homework online, things like, I've looked up, for example, on organisations on Glassdoor to see like what do previous employees say about them. If they're larger organisations, can give you an awful lot of information. So things like that. Make sure, obviously, that you have an understanding of their financial position, where they're at. Depending on the organisation, some will publish their 5-year plan, so you can have a read of that. But yeah, making sure that you've definitely got your head around the risk of joining them.
Okay.
But I would say, I feel like that was too much on the negative there, and I have absolutely loved the 4 board roles that I've done. I'd say they've been some of the most enjoyable points of my career. The satisfaction that you can get out of cheering on the executive to do their job to the best of their abilities, and to watch them flourish, and to watch the organisation benefit from your contribution at that board level is absolutely brilliant. So if you can do it, if you've got capacity to do it and you get a role, I really hope the people watching this enjoy it, and I think you should consider doing non-exec work. But clearly, be aware of those risks.
No, I think it's critical that people do their due diligence, and I couldn't agree with you more that the fewer nodding donkeys around a room, the better. But to do it, and to do it for the right intention, I think is absolutely critical. To that end, what kind of viewpoints do you think might be lacking around those boardrooms? I know you referenced that you were in your mid-20s with a group of 68-year-old individuals, and it's not just age diversity, but what kind of viewpoints do you think are essential to get a good, diverse makeup on a board?
Yeah, well, I think the diversity conversation has gone on, particularly a long time focusing on gender. And I'd say we still have very poor representation of women on UK boards.
Yeah.
When you look at the headlines and you see it's a 40, there's now 40% women on boards, they're talking about the FTSE 250 or 350. Yeah. They are not talking about UK boards. So don't be disillusioned. We have a heck of a long way to go. We're 51% of the population. We are vastly underrepresented on pretty much all boards, other than these few at the top. So we would love to see more women joining board roles. You said, younger candidates. When I say younger, when it comes to board roles, traditionally, the average age is mid-60s.
Right.
And that's because people have been doing these roles alongside retirement. That's changed. And there's kind of been a view historically that you want people who've been chief execs to then be the non-execs, so get what the chief exec's going through. Whereas now I would say you need the full spectrum. So probably around 10 years of career experience is when you've actually gained a huge amount of skills and exposure, and you are now ready to contribute at that kind of level. And depending on the individual, obviously, and how they've progressed. But I would say if you can look at board roles around that stage, fantastic. I'd say the area that we've vastly underrepresented on boards is 30 to 55. So younger non-execs are 30 to 55. We're not talking about bringing 18-year-olds onto boards. I'd say that's our sweet spot of where we think we have not seen enough people from these backgrounds on boards, from those age groups on boards. We, around the time that DB launched, Dynamic Boards launched, the Black Lives Matter movement had a much stronger presence in British media. Been going for a long time before that. But we saw a real drive to improve the amount of ethnic diversity on UK boards, which is brilliant. And I'd say that is still in its infancy. Again, if you're looking at the top 250, 350, they've made some progress elsewhere, vastly behind the curve. So I'd say if you are from Black, Asian, or minority ethnic background, then definitely start looking at board roles, because boards are aware that your viewpoint is underrepresented largely on UK boards. So I think people from those backgrounds, that's a great opportunity. I think we hear things like NHS trusts mention disability and people from LGTB backgrounds. So I guess when you think about the number of people that are using services as people with disabilities, but are not represented on those boards, then it'd be amazing to see better representation there. I'd say we find a lot of organisations mention disability in their adverts, do not have anyone with a disability on their boards. And the number of people sort of finding out about roles that have disabilities probably pretty low. So we'd love to do more work on that, on making sure we see better representation there. LGBT, I've mentioned, and what else? Socioeconomic background. So lots of people have a view that boards are kind of the rich old folk. And it is kind of true. I'd say in the UK historically, it's generally been people of great wealth and great privilege who've often gone to the top schools and that end up on our boards. So how do we change that? I guess we're trying to help getting the word out and making sure that people from all backgrounds hear about it. But we want to raise the profile of people who do get those kind of roles. And I would say to you, if you didn't go to university, sometimes when you apply for executive roles, it asks about your degree. Non-exec roles, it never does. Never mentions degree qualifications. Non-exec roles, they're far more interested in what you've done with your career than what your education was before that. So I'd say socioeconomic background wise, whether you've gone to uni, whether you're from a poorer background or a rich background, everyone is welcome to consider doing non-exec roles. And it would be great to see more northern voices, more working class voices, a better mix on our boards. So that's a bit on sort of the personal characteristics side. In terms of personality types and sort of traits and that side of things, I'd say quite a lot of, if you look at Myers-Briggs kind of profiles, it's quite a lot of the people like me, ENFJs and things like that, that end up on boards, people that are loud, confident, outspoken. And actually boards need a mix of personality types, of traits. And we're not seeing that always happen. So you need the person who's quietly listening for a long time and then asks the brilliant question. You need the different types of processors, different types of thinkers. We're starting to become more aware of neurodiversity and how people's brains work. And actually, when you talk about groupthink, wouldn't it be amazing to have people whose brains generally are wired quite differently and think quite differently? That really helps. So I'd encourage you, whatever background you're from, to be thinking about roles.
Absolutely. I think that you're preaching to the converted here, and in terms of having diversity of thought in those roles, for me, is critical, because I've just seen the benefit of that in my own organization with people I work with who are completely different to me, and as a consequence they come up with much different solutions to the same problem that I would, and that's ultimately the aim, isn't it, to get to the best end result. And so when you talk about the 30 to 55 grouping, I don't want to make generalizations, but quite often these are individuals with the busiest lives possible in terms of either looking after children or parents or both. What realistically is the time commitment for somebody in one of those NED roles?
So we track it. I'm going to get the data here. We track it because we've advertised over 6,000 roles, and we've tracked all the time requirements that they've listed. And what I would say is this is only the advertised roles. So there's lots of companies that don't advertise their board roles, so we can't track them. But the average time commitment that we see is for a non-exec is about 2 days a month, 2.1 days, and for a chair is 4.4 days.
Okay.
The really key thing to know about time commitment for non-exec roles is nobody knows. No non-exec, every time they get an email or receive a phone call, turns on their little stopwatch, tracks how much time they've spent on that, stops the stopwatch, and then goes to a meeting, stops the stopwatch, all of the time. So non-execs don't even know how much time they're spending on the roles. Never mind the organisation who's writing an advert who's guessing how much time they think their non-execs spend on the role, who just copied and pasted from last time probably. So it's a big shot in the dark. The key thing to ask when you're looking at roles is how many contact hours or days are there? Okay. So when do I need to be physically in an office or in a board meeting online or wherever it is? When does that happen? Because for some organisations it might be like 4 till 7 every other month on a Monday evening. For others it might be a full day once a quarter. A lot of them will have a strategy day once a year as well. But if you got the sense that, okay, it's 5 full days a year plus 1 strategy day, and obviously there's going to be emails, there's going to be ad hoc calls, but I could make that work. And you talk to your employer, if you've still got full-time employment, and you say, look, what I'd love is for you to see this as you're kind of investing in an MBA for me. Some people have talked about being an ed as getting a free MBA. Yeah. So from an organisation perspective, they don't have to pay for that. All they have to do is let you leave the office a day a month, say. You might negotiate. And they get the benefit of you developing those skills. And you get the benefit of all of that exposure, which probably means you'll progress in your career faster because you've had that exposure at the board level in a different organisation, cross-pollination of ideas between the two, probably, even if they're in totally different sectors, you will learn from seeing another organisation at that level. So hopefully there's compelling ways that you can put it forwards to your employer. But also you need to think through personally, like you said, I've got 2 kids. You've got your son. Lots of people have kids. They're trying to balance this around their work, and it's sometimes a challenging enough juggle as it is. To imagine adding something else into that, you've got to want to do it. You've got to think this is really important, and you want to do it. And your partner or whoever else is in your life is going to support you with that and making that happen. So that might mean that you're going to have to spend some evenings, a little bit of weekend time, reading the board papers, checking out what's going on. It might mean that you never take a lunch break because you're always trying to catch up in that time. There's different ways that different people manage it. One of the things that you could ask is how long are the board papers? How long do they generally take to review? I've been on a bank's board that sends you hundreds of pages to read. So at the time, I was doing a startup alongside that. So I had the flex to block in days to read those papers rather than lose like whole weekends and all my evenings. But it depends what else you've got going on. Lots of organisations, thankfully, don't send 100-page board packs, but getting a sense of, okay, what is this organisation like? How long are they? And how soon do they send them beforehand? Gives you a sense of how you could manage it. But be positive. I'm sure there'll be a way.
I'm going to say positive and incredibly organised by the sound of it.
Yeah. But the main thing is don't be spooked. So if they say 2 days a month, that doesn't necessarily mean you need 2 days a month out of the office. There'll be ways you can structure it. The key thing is find out the contact times.
And I think the critical piece that you mentioned is that personal development when it comes to selling it to your employer, because hopefully they see the benefit as well in terms of how you then present yourself and how you can add value to the organization, which is ultimately paying you your executive salary, right?
Yes. Yeah.
To that end, and it's not just about compensation for a lot of individuals, because it is about their skills and development, but obviously it's a bit of a black hole sometimes when it comes to what NEDs get paid. So I was really keen to get your sense on, what tends to be the compensation for these roles.
Yeah, I guess like everything, there's a huge market on this. So they range from about £1,000 a year up to 150, 200 grand a year. So it depends what kind of board you're talking about. For the roles we advertise, we see an awful lot around the mid-teens mark. And I'd say classically probably around 8 grand up to 25 grand. We see a lot in that market. There's also a lot of voluntary roles you can do, like charity boards, school governor roles, academy trusts, that you gain a lot of learning from, but you wouldn't get paid anything for. There's also, startups and organisations that might offer equity rather than any payment. So there's a bit of a mix out there. Generally, you'd be paid as a contract for services. So you'd be paid by PAYE from the organisation. So you're on the monthly payroll, but you don't get any of the benefits like pension and things like that. So if you're ever thinking of doing this as like a portfolio career, you've got to think about how you manage that side of things. The key thing is, I guess, looking at the advert and trying to work out, there's the odd role where you think, oh my goodness, when you look at how much work some of the people put in for some of these roles, the pay is terrible. Yeah. So at a quick glance, if you think, oh, this is get rich quick scheme, it's definitely not being a non-exec. So you've got to think the timing can work for you, and that you're happy with the compensation. Generally, most non-execs would say they don't feel like they're phenomenally well paid for the work they do. But there's generally a bit of a push in the market to try and improve non-exec pay. But they're normally very transparent in the advert. And unlike other kinds of roles, you don't generally negotiate it.
Right.
Non-exec roles are generally quite fixed. Depends on the type of organisation, but a lot of the time it's quite fixed.
Okay. I always find that's quite helpful, isn't it? You don't feel like you're having to barter at the end of that.
Yeah. And a lot of roles now in other markets you don't know what the remuneration will be until you've got a conversation later on. Whereas these roles, it's like laid out day one. Generally, this is what you get paid, so you know if you want to do it for that or not.
Brilliant. And obviously you're creating a platform which will hopefully provide a bit more transparency for people to get into these roles. But how important do you still think that social capital and networking is, for individuals on this journey?
Yeah, so I guess the old school thing is, go to your golf club and you'll find your next non-exec role.
Not if they see me playing golf.
We're moving on from that. Sorry, Aaron.
Said not if they see me playing golf. They would not want me anywhere near them.
So yeah, I don't play golf, and I'd say of the 3 paid non-exec roles I've had, I haven't known anyone on any of those boards before I've joined them. And I think I really, really want to hammer home that message that you do not need to network your way into board roles. Yes, some people do. The challenge to that is, are you really independent?
Absolutely.
If we want independence on boards, we need people to be able to apply for a role and get it based on the skills, the experience, and the perspective that they would bring, not who they know. And I hope as a society we are moving on in this respect. I think there's a general recognition that that's a good idea, that lots of organisations are still bloody lazy and just go out to their networks or to their accountants' friends. And we do need to move on from that. I'd say at the same time, I would say when you become a non-exec, it can be quite lonely. Right. It's not like a role where you've got your team, you're with them day to day, you lunch with them, you catch up with them, you're chatting to them so regularly, you can bounce ideas back and forth and that kind of thing. As a non-exec, you often are not together with these people very often. You're there just for the board meetings. So actually looking at how do you create a network around yourself to cheer you on in that role, to support you to be the best kind of non-exec you can be. And when we started Dynamic Boards, I hadn't thought about that aspect that much, but we helped lots of people get board roles, then realised we were just sort of like, good luck, bye. and then we started a NED community. So we have a community that's totally free to join. So if you are on a board, you're welcome to join it. It's for people who are on boards as NEDs, chairs, trustees, and they can join monthly meetups, networking, WhatsApp group, ask a question once a week, good debate. So there's a lot of value in doing that kind of thing. But I would say definitely don't feel you need to be in the know with people on the boards already in order to get the roles. But sadly, still, that is happening.
Absolutely. And I think it's key to avoid a bit of that groupthink that you mentioned earlier, to go out beyond your networks in order to get that diversity of thought.
Yeah.
But firstly, thank you for all of your time so far. I've got one final question, if that's all right with you. And it's a really simple one. It's just, what advice would you give for aspirant NEDs that would help them stand out when they're going through this process, or things that you think would be really useful for them to know?
Yeah, I'd say a couple of key things. One is you need to show that you're ready for non-executive work.
Yeah.
So it might be totally different to every other application you've ever done, in that normally you're saying, I've done this job, I can do this job, I'm good at this, you will need me to do this. Whereas actually as a non-exec, what you're saying is, I can operate at that level. And if you don't have board experience, maybe you've done a charity role, charity trustee role, something like that. But if you don't, do you have board-like experience? So if you're not on the executive committee in your workplace, and this is particularly the case for people in really large workplaces where actually being on the top exec committee is, not very much like me at RBS.
I
had
it's going to take a while.
senior experience, but I wasn't on the RBS board. So you want to articulate, okay, what experience do you have at that kind of level? And it might mean that you have presented to board. It might mean you've been on the board. It might mean you have run a subcommittee on something or other. Might mean you've chaired that subcommittee. Might mean you've, I don't know, whatever you've done that's shown that strategic level experience, that's what you want to be able to convey. So we also talk about board-like experience. So you need to show that you understand the difference between executive and non-executive. You're not going to tread on the executive toes. So that would be the first thing. The next thing I'd say is talk about the skills, experience and perspective that you will bring that the organisation needs. So what might be worth doing is having a look at their board. Who have they got at the moment? Helpful if you know who's leaving, because then you can see where the gaps are. But who have they got? What sort of backgrounds do they have? Then you can articulate, okay, I am bringing something that you don't have. I am bringing this. If you are younger, if you are from a background that's underrepresented on that board, talk about it. Say, I think that would be brilliant for you to have that representation there as well. And then lastly, I'd say, do your research on that organisation. They really can tell when you have shown an interest in what they do, in their mission, in the challenges they're facing. If you've done your own research and you've spotted those things, you pull things out, you've talked to other people in the market to get ideas, then talking about what interests you in the organisation and how you think you can help them with the big challenges in their market will definitely go a long way. I think they can tell that, and whatever you do, don't spray and pray with your applications. Don't just scatter them everywhere. I'd say work out an organisation where you think, I've got an in here. I really think I'd add value there, and then put the research in and put that compelling cover letter together.
Brilliant. So don't forget that you're uniquely you. And then I think that the interesting piece on the executive bit is, I think that once they get to that senior level, they sometimes forget about the research, because the assumption is that their skills will speak for themselves. You're like, but you've still got to show that you're interested in this organisation. So I think that's a really interesting point that I think people often forget. Look, Sarah, really, really thank you for your time. Lots of really interesting points, advice and opinion shared. And I'd recommend all of our network to join Dynamic Boards. I think it's a wonderful platform, lots of really good roles out there. And thank you again for your time.
Thank you, Aaron. Thanks so much for having me. And if you're watching this and you haven't signed up yet, please do. And if your organisation is looking for new board members, also please come to us, because we can help advertise those roles too.